Hello there, my name is Michael Kennedy. I'm a tool maker at Highway 20, and I have a business proposal for Janicki Industries. First off, I'd just like to say Janicki is doing an absolutely phenomenal job of protecting American interests overseas. However, even as our foreign policy is increasing, the everyday life for young Americans is getting worse and worse. With wages stagnating and housing prices growing higher and higher every year, something needs to be done, and I think Janicki is the answer. When adjusted for inflation, real wages have only increased 20 to 30% over the last 50 years, while housing costs have increased nearly 1,000%. So a house that used to cost only about 2 years' wages, give or take, is now well over 10 years' wages. This has basically turned the American dream into the American nightmare. However, I'm here to propose solutions, not just complain. Young professionals don't need some stupid government program or some socialist handout. No, what they need is an opportunity to work hard and actually earn something they can call their own. And I believe modular homes constructed by Janicki Industries is the perfect solution. So you might be thinking to yourself, why a modular home? Why not just a traditionally built home? Well, to answer that question, I'd like to do a little thought exercise, so just go with me on this. Imagine, if you will, you decide that you need a pickup truck and you think a Ford F-150 should suit your purposes. So you reach out to the Ford company and tell them, hey, I'd like a Ford F-150. And they respond by sending out a whole crew of mechanics, technicians, and machinists to fabricate a truck from scratch right in your driveway. Does that sound inefficient? Because that's literally how we build homes. Modular homes built in a factory setting are much cheaper than homes built in the traditional way. And for example, the company Boxable builds their flagship casita for only $35,000 and they sell it for $50K. I mean, that's a great margin right there. The only reason I'm not suggesting we buy a bunch of Boxables and go with that is because the wait list is so egregiously long. Last time I checked, it was over 100,000 people long, and it will take at least 12 years to get just one unit from them. If Janicki were to start producing modular homes in a factory setting, I am absolutely convinced we could do it at a price point that is very profitable for Janicki while being affordable for young professionals. With the new housing codes that have gone through in Washington state in the last couple of years, namely HB 1110 and HB 1337, those codes would allow for middle housing, which means you could buy one single family lot, and if it's large enough, you could divide it between 4 or even 6 different houses, so everyone would have their own yard, but you could treat it like individual units. Also, by holding all of these different assets, Janicki would be able to write off the depreciation of all their real estate holdings. So as this balance sheet grows and grows with more and more assets, it would help Janicki with their taxes and their buying power. That being said, I've only bought 2 homes in my life. I'm not a real estate professional, so I'm going to leave all of that to the professionals. Hopefully they can come up with a better system for acquiring land and better ways to finance it. So, sorry, I wish I had more information on that, but I don't. All right, I've pulled out the whiteboard. Time for a bunch of hypothetical numbers. Nothing here is set in stone, but it's just for your consideration. Okay, so let's say we start by building something as simple as a shipping container house. And let's say we can keep the cost per unit and the cost per land under $50K each. I think that's actually pretty reasonable. There are people who build shipping container houses for only $20K. Also, Boxable builds their casita for only $35,000. So I think $50K is reasonable for the unit. As far as land goes, because of those housing bills that went through back in, I believe, 2023, splitting the land between 4 to 6 units means you could find, a piece of land for $250,000, split it between 5 units, and then it's only $50K each. So I believe that's very possible. So between those two, that's a total of $100,000 per unit. Now, if we rented them out for $1,000 a month, that means you're making a 1% return every single month, or 12% a year. That's a really reasonable return. Now, if we were to sell one, if we set the price for all-in-one retail at $200,000, that would be a 100% return. So whether someone chooses to rent indefinitely for $1,000 a month or chooses to buy all at once for $200,000, it's profitable for Janicki. Now, the really cool part, and this is where I think our buyers, especially if we're selling to employees first, I think this is where the motivation is really going to kick in. Let's say, as soon as you move into a unit, you start by renting it. But as you pay down that balance, if you make extra payments, it will reduce how much you have to pay in monthly rent. So for example, your unit costs $200,000. If you can pay the balance down $20K, so you go from owing $200,000 to owing 180,000, your monthly rent will go from $1,000 to $900. That way you're only paying rent on the outstanding balance, that which you don't already own. I think this is extremely fair, and at the same time, it would be beneficial to Janicki because that means the buyers are more motivated to make extra payments a lot faster. So Janicki is going to get a better return on their assets, and at the same time, Janicki is still going to be able to take advantage of depreciation and their growing list of assets on their on their financials, because we're not actually going to be selling the units, we're just going to be selling shares of the units, and as people pay those down, their rent will go down. So even after somebody has, paid off their balance entirely, paid it down to zero, Janicki's made $200,000, their rent drops to zero, but technically the unit itself still belongs to Janicki. So Janicki has made $200,000, they can still claim the real estate, they still can claim depreciation, and that person, yes, they have zero to pay in rent, so it's awesome for them, and they have that ownership, they own those shares, but Janicki has made $200,000, and they hold this asset, and they get the depreciation. I think it's a win-win-win. It's a phenomenal option for Janicki, and it's empowering for the buyers because they see real-time results from paying extra. They see their monthly rent dropping year by year. It's not like a 30-year mortgage where you just pay for decades and decades and you don't see a change. They'll see a change as soon as they pay off 20 grand. Once the smaller units are successful and profitable, Janicki can look ahead and start building family-size units. I think this is really exciting because the people who have bought the smaller units can simply transfer from a small unit to a large unit and have their rent adjusted accordingly. They don't have to worry about actually selling something and buying something new and paying all those taxes and closing costs and getting a real estate agent. No, they just stay in the same system, and Janicki profits both ways because Janicki also doesn't have to worry about their list of assets constantly fluctuating with people buying and selling. No, everything Janicki builds will always belong to Janicki, but the people who rent those units can pay down those shares and just basically eliminate their rent. But the asset itself will always belong to Janicki. I do have other thoughts about how these co-owners, once they've paid off their units or if they buy extra shares outside their units, could start collecting rent revenue as co-owners with Janicki, but that's a few years down the road. This is still just all the hypothetical about how we're going to start with building modular homes and tiny homes and such. So I think all of that can be left for conversations later. For now, I just think Janicki can be the solution to this glaring problem. In conclusion, I just want to say home ownership and acquisition has never been more difficult than it is right now in America. And I was lucky enough to, buy when the market was still relatively low. And now that I'm a homeowner, I just have a sense of wholeness. And, I've been able to get married and start a family. But so many young professionals are holding off on even living. They're not getting married. They're not having kids because they don't feel like they have a place to call their own. I sincerely believe that this issue is necessary for saving the very soul of America. And I know that sounds dramatic to say, the soul of America is dying, but I sincerely believe that. And I think Janicki Industries can help save that, help stop that from happening. So if this gets greenlit, I would be more than happy to be part of this program. But anyway, I'll hear from you if and when I do, and I hope you have a wonderful day. God bless. Bye.